Hello everybody, Glass Half Dead here, and welcome to this emergency broadcast, because that's right, we have a balance data slate for Warhammer 40,000 Kill Team. Let's just read it, let's talk about it. There is an article that accompanies this. The article doesn't say a huge amount, it just lets us know that there's no FAQ, so this is just the balance changes. Now, I was just thinking about doing a video for this, you know, to kind of put out my thoughts on what could be changed and all such things. And basically, none of what I thought turned up. But I never made that video, so that's a great, easy thing to say. Or, you know what, I should lie and say, actually, I knew all of this was coming. No, I didn't. So, first things first, if you're going to the balance data slate and you want to find out what are the new things, it does tell you at the top here that instead of having a circle, the new things have an asterisk. I'm just going to say, you have to zoom in real close to see the difference. Let's do that. There you go. Now you can see the difference. But from back here, nope, it's just a circle. Anyway, so all of this stuff here, we've seen all of this. All good. Excellent. Let's go down to the first changes. We have Novitiates. Now, Novitiates have generally been considered one of the strongest teams out there, so it's good to see a few nerfs. 2 nerfs, to be precise. The auto-chastise equipment costs 2 EP, and you cannot use Axe of Faith to change dice you rolled, or re-rolled. So, good and good. Slay Queen, excellent. Move. Do I even need to say anything? Auto-chastiser was generally considered to be one of the best pieces of equipment around, and for 1 EP, it's nuts. So, yep, increase that, makes sense. Axe of Faith, change dice you've re-rolled. So, in general, all of Games Workshop has the design philosophy that you can never re-roll a re-roll, but Axe of Faith allows you to change the dice face of a re-roll, which is, you know, basically, it was just incredibly powerful because of your ability to manipulate dice, but also your ability to not have to make a decision to manipulate dice. There you go. So, cool. To be honest, fine, whatever. I'm cool with it. Could have, I would argue, taken it maybe even a little step further, but it's fine. Cool. 2 small tweaks. That is something that I think we can all agree here. They haven't done anything crazy. They haven't done something big. On the video that I was going to do, one of the big things I was going to talk about, and I suppose I'll mention it briefly here, is that Games Workshop seems to like to make small changes that have the biggest effect. So these things for Novitiates make a lot of sense. They're changing the equipment point cost. Lovely. Has a small effect. It's a very small tweak. Good. However, and this is why, for example, when they first did some of these balance changes up here, where they just say, hey, all of these teams, plus 1 model. Like, that's a very small line they have to write, but completely changes the balance. Now, obviously, 2 EP for an auto-chastiser, a small line to write, but not as big as an additional model. So they obviously, in the past, have been of the opinion that if they can write a small thing that will have an effect, they will go for that over something else. And so clearly, I would guess, from these 2 changes to Novitiates, they're actually pretty happy with where Novitiates sit. Because they're not big changes. They're not take away an operative kind of thing. Phobos and Warcoven, this is where we get into the interesting things. So I'm just going to have to read it because there's no other way to dissect this. So let's talk about the Phobos first. Generally, it seems that Phobos are one of the poorest performing factions at the moment. So let's have a read. Deadly Shots. This is a new strategic ploy. Costs 1 CP. So Deadly Shots until the end of the turn. I could summarize this as just you get P1, but I'll read the whole thing. Until the end of the turning point, each time a friendly Phobos strike team operative makes a shooting attack, if it hasn't yet performed a charge, fallback, or normal move action during this turning point, bolt weapons it's equipped with gain the P1 critical hit roll for that shooting attack. This has no effect on weapons that have already that already have APX special rule or P1 PX critical hit rule respectively. So on the positive side, I had never expected them to add in an all-new strategic, an all-new ploy. To me, this is a really big change because this is a whole new thing that you have to add to your theoretical rules. Obviously, we're all on Wikipedia, right? Like, before I started talking about this, I pulled up Wikipedia so that I could go and see what the changes are. You're right. So, you know, we're all doing that. But this is an interesting one. So, okay, it's a big thing to change. It's a big thing to add in. I'm okay with that. I don't have an issue with a big change. What does it do, though? So, when it comes to deadly shots for 1 CP, let's just have a think about it. So, it is buffing your shooting for a CP. It is also putting in restrictions of how you can buff your shooting. So, when it comes to the Phobos team, you are in general a shooting team. Yes, you have access to Reavers, but we haven't really seen Reaver spam. It was talked about. It didn't really happen. There's not really a use case for it. If you're going to Reaver spam, you should just run either Legionaries or now, obviously, the Intercession team. There's really no reason to Reaver spam, so you have to play into the benefits of Phobos and what they do well, and they do shooting pretty well because they are just a Marine team and they can double shoot. This buffs their double shoot. So if you want to throw down 2 CP a turn, you can have a bunch of dudes with lethal 5 up, P1, shooting twice. If they don't move. To be clear, you can shoot and then move. That seems to be fine. You can double shoot then move. So it's not stopping you from moving. It's not essentially applying heavy. It's just you must shoot first. Or dash then shoot. And we have to think, is that what the Phobos team needed? Were they unable to do enough damage at range, and so they needed a buff to their shooting? One of the things that the Phobos suffer from is a lack of AP, and this gives them AP. So from that regard, it gives you a little bit of lethality. You can have essentially all of your operatives, or, half your team, 3/4 of your team, suddenly, almost guaranteed, or I think it's like an 86% chance, to have P1 weapon or AP1 weapons. It's pretty good. It's not something you're going to use every time, because, well, essentially, presumably turn 1 you're not going to use it, because if your enemy gives you those good shots, you're safe. So you'll probably use it turn 2 and 3 onwards, maybe, alongside shooting twice, Bolt of Discipline. Let me see. It's not a bad thing that they have done. It does fix a common complaint with the team that they're not killy enough. I haven't had a chance to really sit down and think about all of the knock-on effects, because you have to understand, of course, that when you put this in, it's also having knock-on effects. For example, it actually makes your sniper, your marksman, a little bit less effective. Maybe you no longer need the marksman and you can swap him out for a Reaver or somebody else. Maybe you no longer want your... what's the guy's name? The veteran. Because, like, these are just possible knock-on effects. I'm not saying either of those things I just suggested are true. You still do want both of those models. I'm just saying there might be knock-on effects. I think this is a nice thing to have. It's a nice additional thing, but for the only change, it's not enough. What I would have liked to have seen, and this is something that I think a lot of people have mentioned, is at the very least, I would have liked to have seen Terror for the Reavers to no longer cost an AP. I don't know why that cost an AP. That's just like there's such a harsh nerf to Reavers. Because again, especially now that we've seen Legionaries and Intercession Squad, we're not spamming Reavers, right? if we do that, we're doing it for fluff, because both of those teams will beat the Phobos still. So it's a little bit of a shame to not, you know, buff the Reavers a little bit there. I would also probably say I don't think they should have had another model. I don't think they should be 7 models. That's crazy. The other thing they could have done is, I saw it said guerrilla tactics. That's obviously kind of the defining thing for the Phobos. I heard it mentioned that perhaps what you could have done is either removed the AP cost, or at the very least allowed them to swap the order turn 1 instead of restricting it turn 1. Honestly, I probably would have liked to have seen guerrilla tactics be usable turn 1. I don't think it should have gone to 0 AP. I think that would be incredibly powerful and very boring. Like for a team to just always be able to auto swap, that's quite boring. I don't think that would have been a good change. Instead, they gave them a new strat ploy. Fine, cool, weird. Would have liked to have seen a buff to Reavers. It's okay, I guess. I don't know. I'm not. You know, we have to see the knock-on effects. I'm not blown away by this. It's fine, I guess. I guess my main issue is that it's costing you more CP. If it was just every gun gets P1, I probably would have thought that was too powerful. So I guess, you know, as I clearly run it through in my head, it's like, yeah, okay, if you wanted to give them a way to be more killy, this is acceptable, I guess. It obviously works very nicely with the fact that all of your infiltrators have lethal 5 up, which means that you're almost kind of guaranteed with those models to be AP1. Would have liked to have seen Reavers get a buff. There you go. That's all I can really say. I'm just a bit sad that the Reavers didn't get fixed, because I felt like that was an obvious thing. Is what it is. There are also lots of additional options that could have been taken. I think the issue now is that Phobos are going to be really quite CP dependent. You want to be using Vanguard. You want to be using Bolter Discipline. You want to be using Deadly Shots. What I would have liked to have seen, actually, I remember it now, is obviously we've just had Intercession Squad come out, and they have Bolter Discipline baked into their profile. I think Phobos should have had that. Yeah, there you go. So take out Bolter Discipline, put in Deadly Shots, and then put Bolter Discipline onto the datasheet. That's just something they can do. That, and change Terror to be 0 AP. I think that would have been solid. That would have made them pretty good. I still don't think they would have been top tier. But yeah, they'd be good. Okay, and then we go to Warcoven. Now, I know that many people don't play Warcoven, so hopefully I can let you know what this actually does. So they get 3 new bullet points to affect their whole team. Rubric Command Ability. I'll tell you what that is in a moment. Change the distance requirement to 6 inches instead of 3 inches. The second bullet point is just essentially, well, I'll read it, but it's narrative. Rubric Affinity Battle Honor. For the purposes of the Rubric Command Ability, remove the distance requirement. There you go. Cool. That's narrative. It sounds very good. But, yeah. And then add the following to the Exalted Astartes strategic ploy. In addition, until the end of the turning point, each time a friendly Rubric Marine operative is activated, if it does not perform a fight action during that activation, it can perform 2 shoot actions during that activation. If it's a gunner, one additional action point must be subtracted to form the second shoot action. It's Bolter Discipline. There you go. Unless you're a gunner, in which case it's lame Bolter Discipline. Let's go find out what Rubric Command Ability is. It's nice and simple, as I already have it up here on the Sorcerer. Zoom, zoom, zoom. There we go. Rubric Command once per turning point when a friendly Rubric Marine operative... this is on your Sorcerer, to be clear. Once per turning point when a friendly Rubric Marine operative visible to and within 3 inches, which is now 6 inches, of this operative is activated, you can add 1 to that friendly operative's APL. Cool. I think this is a really good change. Certainly, the issue of rubrics, for those of you that have forgotten, is you have APL 2. That ain't good. That ain't good. So do keep in mind, obviously, that this is the Rubric Marine Gunner. APL 2, if you want to be able to bolter discipline with them, shoot twice, you will have to use rubric command on them, and then all you can do is shoot and then shoot again. I understand why this was done. I guess it makes sense. I mean, the Soul Reaper cannon is really, really strong, so fair enough. I don't necessarily disagree with that. It's a little bit of a shame because, you know, that's all the rubric marine gunner can do, or whatever. So I like this. I think that 3 inches is quite limiting. I think that 6 inches is a much nicer range to be able to buff APL. This essentially gives you 3 more APL every turn, which is pretty nice because you're always running 3 sorcerers. Excellent. And then what was the other thing? It was Exalted Astartes Strategic Plan. Let's zoom up to here. Exalted Astartes. 1 CP. Till the end of the turn point, each time a friendly sorcerer operative is activated. Firstly, it does not perform. If it does not perform a shoot action during that activation, it can perform 2 fight actions during that activation. Cool. If it does not perform a fight action during that activation, it can perform 2 shoot actions during that activation. But it must select different range weapons for those shooting attacks. Range weapons from a Warcoven Psychic Power are eligible for this. Cool. So this is essentially the baked-in bolter discipline, or what's it called when you fight twice? Shoot twice, fight twice, but it's 1, and you can only do 1 or the other. There you go. But now it extends over to the rubric marines as well, and they can shoot twice. So I think that's a really good change. It's good. It's strong. It should have been there. Is it going to be enough for Warcoven? It's an interesting one. I don't think that Warcoven are necessarily terrible. I just think they don't get played a huge amount, and you often, when you're looking at the stats, you often end up with huge divides because the people that want to do well in tournaments and therefore presumably are doing well because they want to be doing well, if that makes sense, are going to go and play the slightly better teams. Unless you're, you know, a faction loyalist, a faction diehard, which I don't think there are that many in Kill Team. There are some, obviously, but it's not the same as 40k. It's not the same as 40k where, you know, putting an army together is, you know, 2 months work plus painting and blah, 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 and like thousands of pounds. No, this is, 1 box, 40 quid, put it together in an evening, paint it over the next week. Okay, let's go. I'm now tournament ready. This is a little bit different. This is much more a case of if you're someone that wants to do well in tournaments, you can just go grab the latest team because it's very much cheaper, much easier. But you can still also be a faction loyalist because you have that team because it's so cheap to just get both. So you can be the guy that both enjoys their faction and goes out and plays the meta team. That's the beauty of Kill Team now, obviously, that it's so cheap and quick and easy to get into and like do that faction hopping. I definitely hear about a lot of faction hoppers in Kill Team. But this means that when it comes to the Warcoven and their win rates, well, people that want to win probably don't play the Warcoven that much because there are better teams to be playing. You can be a Thousand Suns lover and have your Thousand Suns team, but yeah, there you go. Don't know what more to add to that. I don't know if this is really going to have any effect on Warcoven win rates. It's a straight buff to them. Like, you know, yes, they're going to be better. But what was the problem with Warcoven? Were they losing because they didn't have enough APL on the board? Because their rubrics weren't shooting enough? Were they not lethal enough? I don't know if that's the issue. Don't get me wrong, having more kill potential is always a good thing, right? That's never going to be a bad thing to have on the board on your side, because it affects everything. It's going to allow you to also perform more actions and to be more defensive because you're not being hit as much. But I don't know if that's really what Warcoven needed, if I'm honest. Nah, I do like the changes. I think these are good, but actually, I would have liked to have seen them in addition to this, because I think this is, if I'm honest, this isn't so much a buff to their strength. It is, I realise, but it's almost a buff to their quality of life. It's almost a quality of life buff because I think just Rubric Marines should have probably just been APL3, if I'm honest. They already have issues with the movement, right? Like, they already have negatives elsewhere. They probably could have just been APL3. And this just kind of fixes them not being good enough in the first place, if that makes sense. Anyway, cool. I think I've pretty much said everything I have to say. These are the changes. Why would I zoom out that far? I think solid changes for Novitiates. Small little nerfs. It's going to do quite nicely. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more for the Phobos. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more for the Warcoven. Now, with that said, I don't think... You know, I'm really interested to come back to it in 6 months' time, in a year's time, and see how the Phobos and the Warcoven are doing. And the reason I say in such a long amount of time is because, inevitably, whenever any team gets a buff or a change in any way, it's going to draw attention to that team, and some players are going to say, oh, maybe this means the Warcoven are good now. Maybe this means the Phobos are good now. And so you're going to get some of the better players coming over and running them in tournaments. And because they are better players that want to win tournaments, they are inevitably, I would assume, Phobos and Warcoven are going to get that little spike in win rates. But is it going... I don't think it's going to be from the people that are currently playing them continuing to play them and just do better. I think it's going to be from people looking at mixing up their play style, and so maybe this makes them think that, oh yeah, these are valid now. But yeah, that would be my guess. And so I say, let's look at them in a year's time. Once those people that have jumped over and said, yeah, okay, great, I've got a tournament coming up, I want to run Phobos now, because I think that Deadly Shots really changes the game for them. Or I think that Warcoven are now APL gods or something, I don't know. But then, you know, they're going to play their 1-2 tournaments, or they're going to play their tournaments until, is it Shadow Vault comes out? Or whatever, the next big expansion comes out, and then they're going to go and do their own thing again. They're going to go for that meta chase. And so I'd definitely be interested to see what the win rates are once the spotlight is removed from the Phobos and the Warcoven. And with that said, everybody, I'd like to say thank you for watching until the end. It really helps a small channel like mine. If you made it this far, thank you so much. I hope I provided a little bit of interest for you. If you could leave a like, a comment, and subscribe, that'd be awesome. And check out my Patreon, my Discord, my Facebook. I've also got some sick Kill Team merch for you. Anyway, you know, just stay safe out there, guys and girls and others. Goodbye.